Start recording, and we're cool. All right, and I will turn my video off.
I just hit continue.
Yep. All right, so I'll ask a question, and then I'll mute myself, and then I'll come back in. So thanks again. So Greg, my first question to you is, how did Star Trek inspire you?
Well, I've said this before, but it's honestly, I cannot remember a time when I wasn't a Star Trek fan. It's like, what was your epiphany when you discovered Star Trek? I don't know. I have dim memories of, my dad letting me stay up past my bedtime to watch it during its original run on NBC, which, was a big deal, staying up past my bedtime. And then, of course, the syndicated reruns of the original 79 episodes were pretty much, playing in the background of my entire childhood. So, no, Star Trek has always been sort of part of my DNA. I can't remember a time when I didn't know who Spock and Dr. McCoy and Kirk were and everything. And of course, in subsequent years, we've had all the latter day shows and everything. So, Star Trek has always been, one of my, fanish obsessions.
Well, at some point, you decided, I have to write a Star Trek novel. So curious how that process started for you, and how did you actually make that happen?
Well, I remember actually, it's funny, as far back as college, I remember thinking, oh, I'd love to write a Star Trek novel one of these days, because I was aware of their existence. And I remember, playing around with ideas. But it's funny, I discovered my science fiction fandom in college, having been an isolated nerd before that. And that's when I started going to conventions and meeting people and actually meeting real authors. And it's sort of a funny thing, it's like intellectually, that, books don't appear out of nowhere, there are authors. But I never really thought about actually doing it for real as opposed to a pipe dream until you start actually going to conventions and meeting people. And I went to the Clarion West science fiction writing workshop. And, I mentioned, among my early writing instructors were Vonda McIntyre, who was one of the original Star Trek authors, Norman Spinrad, who wrote The Doomsday Machine, David Hartwell, who launched the Star Trek line at Pocket Books, many years ago. So suddenly it became sort of, gee, I'd love to I read Star Trek novels, I'd love to write it. Until suddenly, okay, it was actually David Hartwell who persuaded me to move from Seattle to New York City and pursue a career in publishing. The phrase wasting your life in Seattle may have been used. Okay, But then honestly, it sort of fell into my lap. I was always kind of interested. And as you know, but maybe your listeners don't, I ended up working full-time as a science fiction editor at Tor Books, 9 to 5 for many, many years. That was my day job, was as a science fiction editor. And as a result, I got to know all the other science fiction editors, including the Star Trek people. And eventually, I expressed interest in writing a Star Trek novel. And the door opened when Deep Space Nine came around, because suddenly there was Deep Space Nine, and suddenly the good folks at Pocket Books, and by good folks, I mean John Ordover, suddenly needed a whole bunch of new Star Trek novels, which meant they needed a bunch of new Star Trek authors. They were kind of booked up. They had authors writing the TOS books. They had authors writing TNJ, but suddenly they had to launch a whole new line of Deep Space Nine novels. And that was my foot in the door to, hey, Greg, do you want to get in on this action? And can you do a Deep Space Nine book for me? Which in fact I did in collaboration with John Betancourt. And from then on, honestly, it's the hard part, as with any job, is getting your foot in the door. Once I did that Deep Space Nine book, that led to another book. And now I am at least in the enviable position of, hey, Greg, we need a Voyager book, a TOS book. What you got? I'm at this point, 25 years later, knock on wood, one of the regular stable of writers.
Well,
and it's hard to realize that I have been writing Star Trek novels for more than a quarter of a century now.
Well, I'm a huge fan of your books. You mostly do write, though, original series now. Is there a reason for that?
Well, partly that's my first love. And, to some degree, you'd have to actually ask the TOS, the folks at Pocket Books about that. But no, I'm perfectly happy to write TOS novels. That's the show I grew up on. I have enjoyed all of the latter-day series to various degrees. I've done my TNG books, my DS9 books, I've done Voyager books, but TOS is actually the one that's burned into my brain. And honestly, it's actually kind of easier because as opposed to the 24th century stuff, which is all interconnected, the TOS books are mostly standalones. So I can just kind of do my own thing and not worry about being part of a 15-book, arc, which, makes, for me, I sort of prefer to just sit down and write my own things without having to coordinate with a massive interconnected 24th century universe, which I know other authors are totally enjoy and are doing a great job with all the 24th century stuff. But for the time being, I'm happy to just, write TOS books.
How do you find the characters' voices so well?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, at this point, Star Trek is in my DNA. And especially the original series, again, how many times have I seen Journey to Babel? I don't know. I like to think that I have absorbed them. But there is immersion. When I'm writing a Star Trek novel, I tend to go full immersion. I rewatch the old episodes in the evenings. I listen to the soundtrack albums. And it kind of does depend, like I said, at this point, I think, I've absorbed, say, Dr. McCoy's voice. I do remember a few years back when I wrote a 7 of 9 novel, that at that point, it had been several years since I had written Voyager. And in fact, the last time I had written Voyager had been back in the pre-7 of 9 era. So I remember I did a binge watch because I need to get, and basically did a binge watch of all the 7 of 9 centric episodes, deliberately, mostly to refresh my memory, but not so much about the character and her plot, but to absorb Jerry Ryan's voice so that I could, and I like to think that I'm actually a fairly good literary mimic. As a tie-in writer, it's important to get the right voices right. And for whatever reason, if you listen to it, I can absorb it and get an ear for it. Even like I said, I will go back and fine, let me watch 8, 7 of 9 episodes in a row to make sure I've, absorbed her or assimilated her. Sorry, not absorbed her, assimilated her.
There you go. But you write in other franchises as well.
Yes.
Loved Your Librarians books, for example. But sometimes you write in a franchise or say a film that hasn't been seen. So how is that process different?
Well, to a certain degree, it depends. Like I said, if you're doing something, if I'm novelizing a Batman movie or a Superman movie, to a certain degree, even though, I like to think I know who Superman is. But again, when it comes to writing a movie you haven't seen, and no, I never see the movies before I actually write the books because I'm writing the book at the same time they're making the movie, so they can come out at the same time. Yeah, that's the challenge. I can actually tell a story there. I did the novelization of the first Ghost Rider movie with Nicolas Cage. And it says something about how an actor can bring spin to it. The Johnny Blaze in my novelization is the guy from the comic books. The guy and he's I wrote him as much more the guy I remembered reading the old Ghost Rider comics in the 70s. Whereas we all know Nicolas Cage put his own sort of peculiar, eccentric spin on it. And I remember watching the movie and going, oh, I wrote him more of a straight superhero dialogue. And it's funny because, like I said, it's interesting what an actor can bring. I had the script in front of me. Nicolas Cage is reading the same dialogue that I read in the script, but he's putting his own sort of quirky, I think he's much more of a square-jawed hero type in my novelizations. I didn't perhaps capture the full eccentric weirdness of Nicolas Cage in my Ghost Rider novelization, if that makes any sense.
Oh, no, that does. I like that. Talk about Khan, and you are actually an extra feature on my DVD set. How did that come about?
Believe it or not, I filmed that interview way back in 2001. And yet that, I still hear from people, hey, Greg, I watched that interview with you on the Wrath of Khan DVD, and that thing will apparently outlive me. Okay, every time they reissue Khan in a 20th anniversary edition on Blu-ray, So if you want to see me circa 2001, I'm on the DVD, yes.
Well, talk about why you decided to write about Khan, and it became 3 books instead of just 1.
Well, actually, those books, I always liked the Khan character. Wrath of Khan is far and away my favorite Star Trek movie of all time, of all 13. So, but actually, the Khan trilogy kind of happened by accident. I had written a previous book, a Star Trek novel called Assignment Eternity, which was basically the return of Gary Seven, which was high on my to-do list because I love the old Assignment Earth TV series episode 2 and have always felt cheated of the fact that we never got the continuing adventures of Gary Seven and Roberta Lincoln on TV. But when I wrote that book, I threw in a little bit at the end as an Easter egg, pretty much, where Spock casually mentions, well, you know, Gary Seven and Roberta Lincoln were instrumental in the overthrow of Khan Noonien Singh back in the 1990s. You know, we have to return them to their own time because they have to overcome Khan. And I swear to God, I just saw that as an Easter egg. It seems like, oh, they're kind of contemporaneous. It'd be kind of a cute, you know, punchline for the end of my Gary Seven novel. But to give credit where it's due, John Ordover, my editor at Star Trek at the time, read that manuscript and go, Greg, Gary Seven versus Khan, that's a great idea. Yet that's not a throwaway line. That's a book, you know. Do you want to write that book? And I'm like, sure. And it grew and expanded. And for the next couple of years, I was, writing Khan. But it all started because I thought I would throw a Khan in as an Easter egg at the end of my Gary Seven novel. And lo and behold, it became, a trilogy. And honestly, probably the Star Trek novels I am best known for. So.
Well, and especially because, like I said, you're a feature on my DVD, so it's pretty cool. You're a movie star and you didn't even know it.
No, and honestly, like I said, I've written like lots of Star Trek novels. I think at this point, like 18 or 19. But honestly, when I go to conventions and I'm proud of all of them, it's the Khan books. Oh, you're the guy who wrote the Khan books. You're the guys who wrote the Khan books. I am resigned to the fact my obituary will say Greg Cox, author of the Khan books and many other Star Trek novels.
Well, you did the Q also. That was
Yes.
another, yeah. Talk a bit about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that was actually not TOS. That was The Next Generation. I did an entire trilogy of novels about Q, which honestly, I just mentioned that the Khan books are probably the ones that seem to be the most fondly remembered. But honestly, the Q books are still probably my best-selling Star Trek novels. They were the first books I wrote that ever hit the New York Times bestseller list. I'm still getting royalties on them, which I give all the credit to, in fact, John Delancey in Q, because that character is so popular and so beloved, and I had such a great time writing him. I actually met John Delancey at a Star Trek convention a few years ago and introduced myself by saying, hi, and thank you very much for making me a New York Times bestseller. He was a bit baffled, but
That's cool. So I'm guessing I already know the answer to part of this question. What is your favorite Star Trek series? But of that series, what is your favorite episode?
Ooh, like I said, I like all the other shows, but TOS is the show, or as we called it back in the day, Star Trek, is the show that I grew up on and is burned into my brain. Again, don't get me wrong, I have enjoyed and watched all the other shows religiously, but I don't know them backwards and forwards the way, I can watch 5 seconds of a TOS episode and go, oh, Journey to Babel, oh, Taste of Armageddon. So that's the one that I grew up watching. Later when I discovered fandom, my friends all going to see all the movies. So yeah, I'm a big TOS fan. As to my most favorite, oh, that's like, again, picking my children or something, but I would have to say probably Devil in the Dark would be up there. Journey to Babel would be up there. The Doomsday Machine would be up there. Conscience of the King, which I did a sequel to a few years ago, is up there, And of course, Wrath of Khan is far and away the best of the all Star Trek movies. And I say that not just because I'm the Khan guy.
Oh, right. And actually, I'll tell you, for this project, I actually got to interview Nicholas Meyer, and that was just an absolute surreal experience.
I just read his new Sherlock Holmes novel a few months ago. That was really good.
I enjoyed it immensely as well. Top 2 favorite Star Trek characters?
Well, it's cliche, but Spock, of course, is like the iconic Star Trek character to me, and at least to fans of my generation. Although I gotta say, as I get older, I find myself identifying with McCoy more and more. As I turn into a curmudgeon. Okay, looking beyond TOS just for, let's see. Like I said, 7 of 9 is a very fun character. If I had to kind of go through the series, Picard is great, Data is great. On Deep Space Nine, I really enjoy. Deep Space Nine, I really enjoyed writing Chief O'Brien. I like the whole everyman quality of him, and Kira is a fascinating character. On Voyager, my favorite characters would be the EMH in 7 of 9. I'm less well versed in Enterprise because that's obviously one of the few series I've never written for. But I remember really liking T'Pol and finding her interesting. And Trip was also good. And then, of course, we get into the new shows, and I'm liking Tilly and Burnham and Rafi, and and I'm blanking here. The female scientist on Picard, whose name is momentarily escaping me. But I think she's a lot of fun. The robotics expert.
Right. Who worked with Maddox. Yeah.
Right. Yes. Who's horribly whose name is escaping me at the moment. But yeah.
The actress's name popped in my head, but that's the best I can do. Alison Pill.
Yes, the Alison Pill character. She is fun. And again, she's a character who puts kind of like, hey, Nicolas Cage in Ghost Rider, puts an interesting spin on her dialogue and adds a nice flavor to it. I still love her line she had in one episode where she just sort of said, does anyone else think that the way of absolute candor sounds kind of annoying? She again has this sort of everyman quality to her. She kind of says something we're all thinking, as opposed to possibly the more sort of, loftier dialogue, She kind of reacts like a normal person would be if they were tossed into this crazy situation.
I think that's why I like Tilly so much too, is she just feels like a real person dealing with real emotional during these situations.
She's very relatable.
Yes.
And maybe not quite as larger than life, perhaps, as some of the other more iconic characters,
Do you have any plans to work on a Discovery or Picard novel?
Honestly, that is up to the powers that be of Pocket Books. I have not approached them about it. They have not approached me about it. At the moment, those books seem to be in very good hands. Certainly, I would not say no. But in the meantime, I also I love writing TOS novels. I'm perfectly happy to keep writing TOS novels since that seems to be my niche at the moment. But yeah, I would.
Well, keep doing it because I'm loving those. So please.
I have a new one coming out in November, in theory.
Oh, I like this. Okay. What do you see as the future of Star Trek, especially with Discovery and Picard opening the franchise to?
Oh yeah, it is a good time to be a Star Trek fan. We've got. In fact, I'm sort of counting the days for Discovery number 3. I was just watching the trailer for season 3 the other day and sort of scanning it to see if there was a date. And, Picard was my Thursday afternoon ritual. I'm sort of missing my Thursday afternoon watch the new episode of Picard ritual now that it's over, And yeah, we got all these new projects. It's interesting stuff. I'm still looking forward to the Michelle Yeoh series down the road, And honestly, I have no inside information. I have no idea what's going on in the movie end of things. I'm still hoping for a 4th of the new Star Trek movies. So we'll see, But no, it's that exciting and interesting. And the new stuff is, what I love about the new shows, Discovery and Picard, is they actually feel like shows made in the 21st century. They do not feel like a show made in the 60s. They do not feel like the 90s era stuff, which was great, but it had its, you couldn't do that today, So these actually feel like Star Trek, but also like a new, fresh take on Star Trek that looks like somebody made in the 21st century, as opposed to trying to recreate a 1960s show or a 1980s style show with that kind of pacing or whatever. Serialized storylines,
Do you miss episodic though? Because we're doing all serialized now.
Not really. I'm actually, I do actually often defend episodic TV. It works really good for some shows. Monk was episodic. That was great. Branching out, I will argue, vociferously, and no one else cares that, Ghost Whisperer worked better episodic than when they tried to do story arcs. But, that is what TV is today. Prestige television tends to be serialized, and that's actually in some ways not a bad thing. I mean, as much as we love TOS, it is kind of odd that you never hear Edith Skelter. Nothing ever, you never heard repercussions of anything. Edith Keeler was never mentioned again after her dying. But maybe but episodic is good. I mean, maybe they can try doing a show that's more episodic. It really sort of varies. On X-Files, I actually love the Monster of the Week episodes way more than the Byzantine conspiracy stuff. So it's not a default that serialized is better, even though that's sort of the more accepted standard these days.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you. No, yeah, no, it totally made sense. Thank you. That was great. The last question I have for you, this will be a fun one for you. Is there a Star Trek show or scenario that you've been wanting to write but have not had the opportunity to do so yet?
My honest answer, honestly, is no, because like I said, I've been at this for 25 or so years now. So I sort of have worked through my immediate to-do list. I had like a to-do list, which was bring back Gary 7, etc. Nowadays, what I do, so I can't say that I would have an opportunity to actually have done it by now. If I had a Star Trek in me that I was burning to write, I think Pocketbooks would have let me write it by now. But what I am always sort of looking for these days is what haven't I done yet? And even this often involves zooming in on characters. The book I'm currently working on, which I actually just finished proofreading about a week ago, the one that's coming out in November, is very much a Dr. McCoy novel. And that was inspired by the realization that, I've never actually written a McCoy-centric novel. I love the character, I love DeForest Kelley, and it sort of hit me, why have I never written a, McCoy-centric novel before? So I like to describe the new book as basically a love letter to McCoy. And also Nurse Chapel is very heavily involved in this book. And again, it was a character I realized that, in all honesty, I had never really done much with. She'd probably wandered in and, handed a scalpel to Dr. McCoy at some point in one of my books. But so yeah, I'm always sort of looking for different combinations, or, hey, do a book where Spock and Chekhov are teamed up together and have some fun, It's like looking for the stuff that you haven't done before, because I don't want to repeat myself. Unfortunately, it's a big enough universe that, okay, but when it comes to I really want to do a sequel to Conscience of the King, I've done it. Or writing novels about Khan, I've done it. So, and I think we've milked the original 79 episodes pretty extensively. It's pretty hard, outside of doing a sequel to Spock's Brain, I'm not sure there's any episodes left to do sequels to. And by the way, I have been told on record, Greg, don't even think about doing a sequel to Spock's Brain. They know me too well.
Truth is, though, if he did it, I'd read it. It probably would end up better than the original episode. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's fun ideas you could probably work in there.
I just wanted to see the Melkotians come back, but it's just me.
Well, I was very excited. Like I said, I just picked up Christopher Bennett's new Star Trek novel, which I haven't read yet, but he brought the Medusans back. And there was even sort of a tinge of jealousy. Ooh, he beat me to bringing the Medusans back. That's from Is There in Truth No Beauty? So, that's cool. So yeah, we're still, there's still fun stuff that, like I said, you've always characters, because TOS was episodic, we have all these races and aliens that we saw once or twice and never again. And so it is fun to go back and bring back Gary 7 or Lenora Caridian or Kevin Riley, and plus it gives me an excuse to go back and watch the original episodes again and again.
I love it. So this is the essay portion of the interview, and I'm joking, but Can you do Space the Final Frontier? Can you say that whole speech?
Ooh, oh, you're hitting me on a day when I'm kind of sleep deprived, but okay.
Give it a shot.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
That was almost perfect. Thank you.
Hey, I had no crib sheet in front of me.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's good. Can you give me a live long and prosper?
Live long and prosper.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Greg. Let me stop recording here for a second.